Welcome to Passions Illustrated. Before starting the video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The crash of the crystal goblet against the marble floor echoed through the ballroom of the Huntington Club in Boston, Massachusetts. Andrew Parker watched the glittering shards scatter like tiny stars at the feet of his wife Michelle, who stood paralyzed, her pale face contrasting with the red dress she had chosen especially for the evening. In Michelle's trembling hands, the divorce papers seemed to weigh a ton. "How could you do this here now?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried the weight of a contained storm. Andrew adjusted his navy blue tie, his face maintaining a studied calm that hid months of anguish and investigation. "I thought it appropriate, considering this is where it all began, isn't it, in this very club, exactly 1 year ago, when you introduced me to your best friend Richard?" Across the hall, Samantha Morrison, the organizer of the club's annual charity event, watched the scene unfold with a knot in her stomach. She knew it for months she had carried. The weight of that knowledge, a silent witness to the furtive encounters between Michelle and Richard in the club's gardens, the messages exchanged during the event. She organized the glances that said more than words. "Andrew, can we talk about this at home, please?" Michelle tried to keep her composure, aware of the curious glances that were beginning to turn towards them. "How do we talk about the spa in Vermont, or about the business meetings that always coincided with Richard's trips to Boston?" Andrew's voice, still controlled, carried a deep pain that made Samantha cringe. Involuntarily, Richard Matthews, the supposed best friend, was absent that night. Conveniently, Andrew thought the marketing executive always had the perfect excuse, the impeccable alibi, and Andrew admitted that his performance as the couple's devoted friend had been Oscar-worthy. Samantha approached discreetly, trying to minimize the spectacle that was beginning to form. As the organizer of the event, it was her duty to maintain the dignity of the occasion, even if her heart was divided. She had become close friends with Andrew over the last few months, watching his transformation from confident husband to a man plagued by suspicion. "Gentlemen, perhaps we could continue this conversation in the office," suggested Samantha, indicating a side door. Michelle took the opportunity to try and regain control of the situation. "Sam, please tell him he's being ridiculous. You know me, you know that Richard and I are just friends." Samantha's silence was deafening. Andrew laughed humorlessly. "Look at that, Michelle. Even Sam, who you consider a close friend, can't defend your lie." The revelation hit Michelle like a slap. Her green eyes, always so sure and determined, now flicked between Samantha and Andrew, realizing for the first time how exposed she was. "The photos are all in there," Andrew continued, pointing to the envelope that accompanied the divorce papers, along with credit card statements, hotel records, and a very interesting timeline that the private investigator put together. "I thought you'd appreciate the organization. You've always been meticulous with details." The hall was now completely silent, the background music sounding distant and inappropriate. The guests, members of Boston's high society, tried to disguise their interest in the scene, but it was impossible to ignore the drama that was unfolding. "You don't understand," Michelle began, her voice breaking. "Richard understands me in a way that you never spare me." Andrew interrupted her, finally allowing some of his anger to shine through. "Save your justifications for someone who still believes them. I signed my part this morning. The ball is now in your court." Samantha watched Andrew turn and walk towards the exit, his back straight, maintaining the dignity that Michelle had thrown away. She knew she should remain neutral, professional, but the memories of the last few months weighed heavily on her conscience. She remembered the afternoons when Andrew would show up at the club early before events looking for a friendly ear, how he initially fought his own suspicions, calling himself paranoid jealous, how he cried the day he finally accepted the truth. Holding the first photos the investigator had handed over, Michelle was still standing in the same spot, the crumpled papers in her hands, when her phone vibrated. Samantha didn't need to see the screen to know who it was. Richard, probably worried that Michelle hadn't answered his previous messages. "What do I do now?" Michelle asked, to no one in particular, her voice small and lost. Samantha sighed, picking up the shards of glass from the floor. "I think this is a question you should have asked yourself a long time ago, Michelle, before you turned your life and Andrew's into shards like this bowl." The night went on like all gala evenings at the Huntington Club. The musicians played, the waiters served, and Boston society pretended it hadn't just witnessed the end of a 5-year marriage, but something had changed irrevocably that night. And Samantha knew that the reverberations of this moment would be felt for a long time to come. As she organized the removal of the last guest, Samantha couldn't help thinking about how people build their lives on foundations of sand, believing them to be rock solid, and how sometimes everything needs to fall apart so that something truer can be built on the rubble. Samantha walked the empty corridors of the Huntington Club the next morning, her heels echoing against the polished wooden floor. Boston sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating the remnants of the night before a forgotten napkin, a lonely cup. Memories of a broken marriage. Her phone vibrated for the third time. That morning it was Andrew. "Sam, we need to talk." His voice sounded hoarse, probably after a sleepless night. "You knew all along, didn't you?" She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the guilt she'd been carrying for months. "Can we meet?" At the Beacon Hill Coffee House in an hour. The coffee house was relatively empty. When Samantha arrived, Andrew was already there, the deep circles under his eyes contrasting with the impeccable suit. He wore always the professional, even when his world was falling apart. "Why didn't you tell me?" was the first thing he said when she sat down. Samantha wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, seeking comfort in its warmth. "It wasn't my place, Andrew. Besides, you had to find out for yourself. If I'd told you, you'd always wonder if I wasn't exaggerating, if it wasn't just one person's word against his wife." Ex-wife, he corrected automatically, a bitter smile on his lips. "You know, it's ironic. I spent months convincing myself that I was crazy, that it was irrational jealousy. Michelle was an expert at making me doubt myself." "Gaslighting," Samantha muttered. "It's a form of emotional abuse." "Exactly." Andrew took a sip of his coffee. "Every time I questioned a suspicious message or a coincidence, she made me feel like I was the villain in the story, as if my mistrust was the real problem in our marriage." Samantha recalled the first time she witnessed one of Michelle and Richard's encounters. It was during a charity event in March when she caught them in an intimate moment in the club's gardens. Michelle had begged for her silence, claiming it was just a moment of weakness. "The first time I saw anything was in March," Samantha finally confessed, "at the Children's Foundation event." Andrew nodded slowly. The investigator mentioned March in his report. He said that's when the hotel meeting started. Apparently, they had been emotionally involved for months before that. "Michelle has changed a lot in the last year," Samantha observed. "She started dressing differently, acting differently. I should have realized something was wrong when she started scheduling all those casual lunches to coincide with Richard's visits. Everyone noticed except me." Andrew laughed humorlessly. "Or maybe I just didn't want to see it." 5 years of marriage, Sam, 5 years of building a life together, and she threw it all away for what? Adrenaline, excitement? Sometimes people cheat not because something is missing in their relationship, but because something is missing in themselves. Samantha offered softly. The silence that followed was filled with the buzz of coffee and the distant sound of Boston traffic. Andrew played distractedly with the wedding ring he hadn't yet taken off. "I got a message from her this morning," he finally said, "asking us to talk, saying we can fix it, as if it were a broken vase that could be glued back together." "And what have you replied?" "Nothing yet. What's there to say?" "I'm sorry, but I'd rather not rebuild my marriage on a foundation of lies." Samantha watched Andrew carefully. Despite the obvious pain, there was something different about him, a strength that hadn't been there before, a determination born of the truth finally being revealed. "You know, it's funny," he continued. "Last night after I left the club, I went for a walk around the public garden. I sat on that bench where I asked Michelle to marry me. I thought it would be devastating, but it was liberating, like I could finally breathe after months of suffocating." "Sometimes we need to lose something to find ourselves," Samantha reflected. "Yeah, maybe you're right." Andrew finally took off the ring, placing it on the table. "Thank you, Sam, for being a friend even when you couldn't be honest with me." "I'm sorry, I didn't know," he interrupted her gently. "You were right, I needed to find out for myself. And now that I have, I can move on." When they left the cafe, the Boston sun was high in the sky. Samantha watched Andrew walk towards his office in the financial district, his back straight, head held high. She knew that the healing journey would be long, but she also knew that he was stronger than she had imagined. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Michelle. Samantha stared at the screen for a long moment before declining the call. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, and some truths once revealed change everything forever. On the way back to the club, Samantha reflected on how the choices we make shape not only our lives but the lives of those around us, and how sometimes the role of silent witness can be the hardest of all. The sound of the cell phone falling into the bathtub echoed through the luxurious bathroom of Michelle's apartment. She watched almost in slow motion as the device sank into the foamy water, taking with it dozens of unanswered messages from Richard. It was symbolic. She thought of how everything seemed to be sinking in her life. 3 days had passed since the night at the Huntington Club, and Boston seemed like a different city. Now the streets that had once made her feel powerful and free now seemed suffocating. Every corner held the possibility of meeting someone who had witnessed her public Humiliation, the intercom rang, making her jump. It was Richard, of course. He had been practically camped outside the building since the incident, begging for a chance to talk. Michelle ignored the doorbell, just as she had been ignoring everything for the last few days. "Miss Parker?" Her doorman's voice sounded through the intercom. "Mr. Matthews is here again. Shall I?" "I'm not for anyone, Marcus." "Absolutely no one." Across town in the law office where he worked, Andrew stared at the computer screen. Without really seeing at the words of the contract he was supposed to be reviewing danced before his eyes, turning into memories he would rather forget. Andrew, Jessica, his assistant for 7 years, knocked softly on the door. "Samantha Morrison is here to see you." He looked up, surprised. Samantha was standing in the doorway holding a brown briefcase and wearing an elegant navy blue outfit. "Sorry to drop in unannounced," she said, entering when he gestured, "but I thought you should see this." The folder contained photos, more photos, but these were different from the ones the private investigator had obtained. These showed intimate moments between Michelle and Richard inside the Huntington Club itself, in areas that were supposed to be closed to the public. "How?" Andrew asked, his voice hoarse. "Security cameras," Samantha explained, sitting down in the chair opposite his desk. "After that first time I caught them, I started paying more attention. The club security system, records, everything." Andrew flipped through the images, each one a new blow to his already bruised heart. "Why are you showing me this now, Sam?" "Because Michelle is trying to contest the divorce," she replied softly. "I've heard rumors that she's claiming that you have no concrete proof of infidelity, only suspicions and coincidences." A bitter laugh escaped Andrew's lips. "Of course she does. Michelle has always been good at rewriting reality to suit her purposes." "Well, these photos are the property of the club." "An ass. The event organizer, I have access to them." Samantha hesitated for a moment. "If you need them." "No," Andrew interrupted her, pushing the folder back. "I appreciate the intention, Sam, but I don't want to win that way. The evidence I already have is enough. If Michelle wants to drag this into a legal battle, so be it. I'm not going to stoop to her level." Samantha watched the man in front of her, noticing how he seemed both older and stronger since that night at the club. "How are you really, Andrea?" "Honestly, it's like I'm living in a bad movie." He ran his hands over his face, tired. "You know, it's worse. It's not even the betrayal itself. It's realizing that the last 5 years may have been a lie. Every moment, every laugh, every 'I love you,' how much of it was real?" The silence that followed was interrupted by Samantha's phone ringing. It was the club problems with the next event she was supposed to organize. "I have to go," she said, getting up. "But Andrew, not everything was a lie sometimes. People change, make terrible choices, but that doesn't completely erase what came before." As Samantha left, Andrew thought about her words. His gaze wandered to the photo on his desk. He and Michelle on their wedding day, smiles, beaming eyes, full of promise. With a deliberate movement, he flipped the photo over. That same afternoon, Michelle finally left her apartment. The crisp October air hit her like a slap, reminding her that the world kept turning regardless of her personal drama. Her steps automatically led her to the public garden where she used to meet Richard. "I thought I'd find you here." Michelle turned around, surprised to see Samantha standing a few meters behind her. "Did you come to judge me too?" Michelle asked, her voice laced with bitterness. "No," Samantha replied, stepping closer. "I came because despite everything I still care about you, and because I think you're about to make another mistake." "What are you talking about?" "Richard didn't show up today, did he?" Samantha asked softly. "Not yesterday, not today." "Before the messages have stopped too, haven't they?" The tears Michelle had been holding back began to fall. "He said he needed time to think, that the situation is complicated." "The situation has always been complicated, Michelle. The difference is that now it's no longer exciting and secret. Now it's real, with real consequences." The sun was beginning to set over Boston, painting the sky with orange hues that were reflected in the garden pond. Michelle watched a couple walk past, holding hands, looking perfectly happy in their own little world. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" she whispered. "Yes," Samantha replied honestly. "But maybe it's time to stop trying to fix what's broken and start building something new, something based on truth this time." The two women stood there watching the sunset, each lost in their own thoughts about choices, consequences, and the price of truth. Somewhere in the city, Andrew was also watching the same sky, knowing that sometimes you have to let something die so that something new can be born. The distinctive sound of heels against the marble floor of the DiMartino and Associates law office announced the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Richard Matthews, impeccably dressed in his Italian suit, entered Andrew's office unannounced, interrupting his meeting with the divorce lawyer. "We need to talk," Richard declared, his usual confidence slightly shaken by the icy stare Andrew directed at him. "Mr. Matthews, this is a particularly inconvenient moment," the lawyer called DiMartino started to say, but Andrew interrupted him with a gesture. All right, Carl, I think it's time for this conversation anyway. Andrew stood up, adjusting his jacket. Can we continue our discussion tomorrow? When they were alone, silence hung heavy between the two men who had once considered themselves friends. Richard remained standing, his restless hands betraying his nervousness. Michelle doesn't answer my calls, he began, his voice quavering. Andrew laughed humorlessly. And you came to ask for my help to talk to my wife. Excuse me, ex-wife. That's not it. Richard wiped his hands across his face, his veneer as a secure man crumbly. I came to tell you that I'm moving away. I've accepted a position in Seattle. Fascinating how you always find a convenient way out, Richard. First you were the devoted friend, then the secret lover, and now the repentant man, fleeing to the other side of the country. I'm not running away, Richard protested, but his voice faltered. It's just complicated. Andrew moved closer, his eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed his marriage. Do you know what's complicated, Richard? It's spending months doubting your own sanity because your wife and your so-called best friend are manipulating you. It's discovering that every dinner, every event, every shared moment was a sham. At the Huntington Club, Samantha was organizing the last details for the following week's charity event when Michelle appeared, looking a shadow of the confident woman she used to be. I need your help, Sam, Michelle said, her voice shaking. Richard's leaving. Samantha continued arranging the flowers in the center of the table, keeping her hands busy so as not to show her irritation. And what did you expect, Michelle, that he would drop everything for you now that the truth has come out? I dropped everything for him. Michelle exploded, tears streaming down her face. My marriage, my reputation. No, Samantha interrupted her firmly. You didn't let go of anything, you destroyed everything. There's a difference. Back in the office, Andrew watched Richard struggle with his own justifications. I really care about Michelle, Richard finally said, but my life is in Seattle now, my career. Of course it is, Andrew replied, his voice laden with contempt. Your precious career. You know, for months I wondered what Michelle saw in you. Now I understand. You're perfectly compatible in your selfishness. And the club. Michelle collapsed into a chair, her body shaking with sobs. What do I do now, Sam? You start again, Samantha replied, finally sitting down next to her. But first you need to face the consequences of your choices. Richard's phone vibrated. It was Michelle again. He stared at the screen for a moment before declining the call, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Andrew. Do you know what's really ironic? Andrew asked, his voice softer now. I should hate you, but I actually feel sorry for you, because while I can rebuild my life knowing that I was loyal and true, you will carry this betrayal forever. Richard swallowed, finally meeting Andrew's eyes. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm really sorry. You're right, Andrew replied, turning back to his desk. It doesn't mean anything. Good luck in Seattle, Richard. The first hope it pays off. As Richard left, Andrew picked up his phone and texted Samantha. He's leaving. Take care of her at the club. Samantha read the message and looked at Michelle, who was still crying silently despite everything. Her heart squeezed for a friend who had lost her way. Come on, Samantha said, helping Michelle to her feet. Let's have some coffee. You need to start planning your next chapter. The two women stepped out into the autumnal Boston afternoon, leaving behind the weight of the lies and betrayals that had defined the last few months. On the horizon, the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, as if nature itself were trying to soothe the open wounds of that day. Andrew stayed in his office late, going over the divorce papers, but his mind wandered to the future. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to think beyond the pain, beyond the betrayal. Somewhere buried under layers of hurt and disappointment, there was a man who still believed in love and truth, and in the possibility of starting over. The sun finally set over Boston, its last lights reflecting in the windows of the skyscrapers, reminding everyone that even the hardest days come to an end, and that every sunset brings with it the promise of a new dawn. The law office was silent when Andrew walked in that Monday morning. The divorce had been officially finalized the previous Friday, with Michelle signing the papers without contest after finding out about Richard's departure for Seattle. The irony didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Mr. Parker, Jessica, his assistant, appeared in the doorway with a hesitant expression. Samantha Morrison is on line 2. She says it's urgent. Andrew picked up the phone, feeling a familiar anxiety settle in his stomach. Sam, what happened? Michelle tried to Samantha's voice shook. She's at Massachusetts General Hospital, overdosed on sleeping pills. The world seemed to stop for a moment, despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain. Michelle was still someone he had loved deeply for 5 years. She'll be fine, Samantha continued quickly. I found her in time, but Andrew, she needs help, really. 20 minutes later, Andrew was in the hospital, looking through the glass at the room. Where Michelle slept, she looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, so different from the confident woman he had known the doctor say was a distress call. Samantha explained, standing next to him. She knew I was going to show up at that time to pick up some documents from the club. Does Richard know? I tried calling him. Samantha replied, her voice laced with disgust. His secretary in Seattle said he's in a meeting and can't be disturbed. Andrew let out a bitter laugh. Of course he can't, God forbid. He should interrupt an important meeting to report that the woman he destroyed a marriage for tried to kill herself. A nurse came out of the room informing him that Michelle was waking up. Andrew hesitated for a moment before entering, Samantha following close behind. Why are you here? Michelle asked, her voice hoarse and low. Because after all, I'm not like you and Richard, Andrew replied softly. I can't just turn my back on someone who's suffering. Tears began to stream down Michelle's face. I've ruined everything, haven't I? Not just our marriage, but my whole life. No, Samantha intervened, sitting on the edge of the bed. You made mistakes, yes, serious mistakes, but your life isn't over, Michelle. You can still rebuild, you can still find a better way. A heavy silence fell over the room, interrupted only by the constant beeping of the heart monitors. Andrew moved closer to the window, watching the city outside, wondering how life could change so drastically in such a short space of time. I'm going to check myself in, Michelle announced suddenly. There's a rehab center in Vermont. They have a program for people like me, people who have lost their way. Andrew turned to face her. I think that's a wise decision. I'm sorry, she continued, her voice breaking. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I really am sorry for everything. It does mean something, Andrew replied after a moment. It doesn't change what happened, but it means something. Samantha watched the interaction between the ex-spouses with a lump in her throat. It was like watching the end of a long and painful chapter, but also the beginning of something new, something more honest, more true. I'll help with the arrangements for Vermont, Samantha offered. I know some people there who can make the process easier. Michelle nodded, gratitude evident in her red eyes. Thank you. You too. I don't deserve such kindness. It's not about deserving, Andrew said, heading for the door. It's about being human. When they left the hospital hours later, the afternoon sun was painting the Boston skyline in golden hues. Andrew and Samantha walked in silence to a nearby cafe, both processing the day's events. You're a better man than I would be, Samantha finally commented, stirring her coffee. I don't know if I could show you that much compassion. It's not compassion, Andrew replied. Reflecting, it's acceptance. Perhaps I realized that continuing to carry anger and hurt would only keep me stuck in the past, and I want to move on. And where are you going now? Samantha asked, her eyes meeting as over her cup. Honestly, I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, it doesn't scare me. It's like I'm allowed to start again, you know. Samantha smiled softly. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. The cafe was almost empty now, the setting sun casting long shadows through the window. Somewhere in the hospital, Michelle was beginning her own journey of self-discovery and healing. In Seattle, Richard was probably still in his endless meetings, running away from the consequences of his choices. And there in that little cafe in Boston, two people who had been brought together by the pain of others were beginning to glimpse the possibility of something new, something of their own, something true rising from the ashes of broken relationships and revealed truths. Sam Andrew began hesitantly. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Not as friends who shared a drama, but as two people starting from scratch. Samantha's smile lit up her face. Yes, Andrew, I'd love to. Autumn in Boston was painting the streets in golden hues when Andrew received his first postcard from Vermont. Michelle's handwriting, always so precise and controlled, seemed looser, almost cathartic. Therapy is helping, she wrote. I'm finally learning to really know myself. Andrew put the card away in his desk drawer at the office, along with the other papers that documented the end of an era in his life. 3 months had passed since that day in the hospital, and the world was still spinning, bringing with it unexpected changes and new possibilities. Your dinner with Samantha is at 8, don't forget, Jessica reminded her, placing a stack of papers on her desk. And before you ask, yes, I've already confirmed the reservation at Soralina. Andrew smiled, grateful for his assistance. Efficiency over the last few weeks, his dinners with Samantha had become a bright spot in his routine. They began as casual encounters between friends, but gradually evolved into something deeper, more meaningful. At the Huntington Club, Samantha was overseeing preparations for a wedding when her phone rang. It was Michelle. I was discharged today. The voice on the other end sounded stronger, more centered. The doctors say I've made significant progress. That's wonderful, Michelle, Samantha replied. Sincerely, have you decided what you're going to do now? I'm staying in Vermont for the time being. I got a job in an art gallery in Burlington, It's a complete fresh start away from everything. Samantha realized that everything meant more than just Boston and meant the memories, the mistakes, the choices that had brought her to that point. Sometimes distance is exactly what you need. Michelle hesitated. How is Andrew? Samantha felt her heart race. She and Andrew had decided to keep their developing relationship discreet, respecting the healing process of everyone involved. He's fine, moving on with you. The question was direct, without accusation. Michelle. It's okay, Michelle interrupted her gently. You both deserve to be happy, and maybe things happened exactly as they should have. That night, at the Sorellina, Andrew watched Samantha through the soft candlelight. She looked especially beautiful in a navy blue dress, her eyes sparkling as she told him about her conversation with Michelle. She seems different, Samantha commented, playing with her wine glass, at peace with herself. People can change, Andrew reflected, when they really want, when they find real reasons to. How do we change? Samantha asked, her voice carrying a note of vulnerability. Andrew reached across the table, entwining his fingers with hers. I don't think we've changed as much as we've evolved. We grow. Through pain we learn from mistakes, our own and those of others. Dinner progressed with a comfortable intimacy that only exists between people who have shared intense moments together. Later, walking along the bank of the Charles River, Andrew stopped, turning to Samantha. I've received an offer to open a satellite office in Chicago, he revealed. They want me to lead the firm's expansion into the Midwest. Samantha felt her heart squeeze. Oh, and will you accept? That depends. Andrew took a step towards her. Does the Huntington Club have branches in Chicago? A smile began to form on Samantha's lips as she understood the implication. Actually, yes, and coincidentally, they're looking for a new events coordinator. What an interesting coincidence, Andrew smiled, pulling her closer. Sam, these last few months you've been my anchor when everything was falling apart, and now you're my compass pointing to a new future. Andrew, I'm not asking for an answer now, he continued. I just want you to know that when I think of Chicago, of starting over, I can't imagine doing it without you. The city lights reflected in the river water, creating an almost magical setting for that moment. Samantha allowed herself to imagine a life in Chicago, new challenges, new opportunities, and most importantly, a new chapter alongside someone who had learned just like her that true love begins with honesty. You know what she finally said? Chicago has always seemed like a fascinating city to me. Andrew kissed her then, right there on the banks of the Charles River under the starry Boston sky. It was a kiss that carried promises of the future, of infinite possibilities, of a love built on a foundation of truth and mutual understanding. The next morning, Samantha found an envelope on her desk. At the club inside was a plane ticket to Chicago and a simple note: to explore our future together. And so as fall in Boston began to give way to winter, 3 lives followed their new paths. Michelle finding peace and purpose in Vermont, away from the ghosts of the past. Andrew and Samantha planning a future in Chicago, proving that sometimes you have to lose something precious to find something even more valuable. The Huntington Club's silent witness to so many decisive moments would still be there, its walls holding stories of loves lost and found, of betrayals and redemptions, of endings and beginnings. Because in the end, that's what life is, an endless series of chapters, each one preparing us for the next, each ending carrying within it the seed of a new beginning. Winter in Chicago was painting the city in shades of white and gray when Andrew received an unexpected envelope. The postage stamp read Burlington, Vermont, and the elegant handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was an invitation to an art exhibition, Metamorphosis, a journey of self-discovery. Would be Michelle Parker's first solo show at the prestigious Burlington Gallery. The invitation included a personal note: you two have been a fundamental part of my transformation. I would love you to be there. Andrew met Samantha in the kitchen of their shared apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. 6 months had passed since their move to Chicago, and each day confirmed that they had made the right decision. Look what's here, he said, showing her the invitation. Samantha took it, her eyes scanning the golden words printed on the paper. Do you want to go? I think we should, Andrew replied, hugging her from behind as she prepared breakfast. It's part of the healing process, isn't it, for all of us? The trip to Vermont was scheduled for the following weekend. The small airport in Burlington welcomed them with a gentle snowfall typical of January. In New England, a cab took them through the historic streets to the hotel Vermont, where Michelle had booked a room for them. Are you nervous? Samantha asked as they got ready for the vernissage. Curiously, no, Andrew adjusted his tie in a mirror. It's as if like we're closing a circle. The Burlington Gallery occupied an old renovated warehouse in the historic center of the city. When Andrew and Samantha arrived, the space was already packed with people from the local art community. The white walls displayed a series of abstract canvases, each telling a story of transformation through color and form. Michelle spotted them. As soon as they entered, she looked different, lighter, more authentic. Her hair, once always impeccably tidy, now fell in natural ways, and her clothes were more relaxed but still elegant. "You've come," she smiled, stepping closer. There was a moment's hesitation before she hugged first Samantha, then Andrew. "It means a lot to me." "These are incredible works, Michelle," Samantha commented, looking at one of the larger canvases that dominated. The main wall painting showed a phoenix emerging from ashes in shades of red and gold. "This is my favorite." Michelle guided them to a smaller, more discreet canvas. It showed 3 distinct silhouettes connected by delicate lines of light. "I call it redemption. It's about how sometimes we need to lose something precious to find something truer." Andrew felt Samantha's hand squeeze his. "It's beautiful how you've turned pain into art," he said softly. "Therapy taught me that healing comes in many forms," Michelle replied. "For me, it was through painting. For you, Andrew, it was finding a more honest love. And for you, Sam, it was having the courage to follow your heart, even when that meant leaving Boston behind." A waiter passed by offering champagne, and the 3 of them took glasses. "To transformation," Michelle proposed. "To truth," Andrew added. "To love," Samantha added. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Michelle invited them for coffee in her studio, located at the back of the gallery. The space was cozy with large windows overlooking the snowy mountains. "I got a letter from Richard last week," Michelle commented, pouring coffee into handmade mugs. "He's getting married, an executive he met in Seattle." "How do you feel about that?" Samantha asked gently. Michelle considered the question for a moment. "At peace, really. What we had wasn't real. It was a fantasy that almost destroyed 3 lives. But look at us now. We've all found our ways, even if separately." Andrew observed the space around him. The clean brushes lined up methodically, the canvases in various stages of completion. "You seem happy here." "I am," Michelle smiled. "For the first time in my life, I'm being completely honest with myself, and with others. It's liberating." The conversation flowed naturally, as between old friends who had overcome old hurts. Michelle talked about her plans to open an art school for underprivileged children. Andrew talked about the success of the Chicago office. Samantha shared stories about the events she was organizing in the corporate sector. When they finally said goodbye, it was after midnight. The snow had stopped, and the sky was clear, full of stars. "You know," Michelle said at the gallery door, "sometimes I think that all this had to happen, not the way it happened, of course, but maybe we all needed that jolt to find our true paths." On the way back to the hotel, Andrew and Samantha walked hand in hand through the snow-covered streets. The silence between them was comfortable, full of mutual understanding. "She's right, you know," Samantha finally said, "about finding our true paths." Andrew stopped, pulling her close. "You know what's funny? When I found out about Michelle and Richard, the first thought, I'd never be able to trust anyone again. But you taught me that true love begins with honesty." Under the soft light of Burlington's old street lamps, Andrew knelt in the snow. "Sam, you taught me to believe in love again. Will you marry me?" The ring was simple and elegant, just like the woman it was meant for. Samantha felt hot tears run down her face as she answered yes. With a radiant smile from her studio window, Michelle watched the scene unfold. A serene smile played on her lips as she returned to her unfinished canvas. With soft brushstrokes, she began to add shades of blue and silver to the composition, colors of hope, of new beginnings, of love reborn from the ashes of past relationships. And so on a winter's night in Vermont, a circle came. Full circle, 3 people who had been brought together by pain found their paths to happiness, each in their own way. Michelle, through art and self-knowledge. Andrew and Samantha, through a love built on a foundation of truth and understanding. Love, after all, has many forms. Sometimes it breaks so that it could be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes it needs to be lost in order to be truly found. And sometimes, like that starry night in Burlington, it simply waits for the right moment to bloom, like a stubborn flower breaking through the winter snow, promising a new spring.